right? This time thanking God, the Father, the Son, and the Spirit for subtlety. Let's look at the last chapter of 1 Corinthians. 1 Corinthians chapter 16 through the lens of transparency, in a chapter where Paul is going to remind the Corinthians, even after all that he has written, that he still loves them. But he's not going to simply say it, especially after giving an entire chapter of the letter to a discussion of love. Subtly, he's going to seem to show them that he really does love them in spite of all of the difficult things he has had to write, in a chapter that structurally is going to give them some closing instructions, but interwoven into those instructions are context. He is including them on the larger context of why he's giving them final instructions, as he lets them know that he is still planning to visit them, following up on the letter. But in the first, once again, vision, might have to use two resources. Verses 1 through 4, in verses 1 through 4, he is going to give instructions concerning the collection of the saints. A set of verses that we traditionally use, especially in the churches of Christ, as a guideline for our own collections on the first day of the week. But as we said, he is not simply giving the instructions, he is helping them to understand the context. And so in verses 5 through 9, he's going to help them understand that he is planning to visit them. And part of the reason why he wants them to have the collection done on a weekly basis is so that he does not have to make delay in collecting the resources that they intend to contribute when he arrives. And so he lets them know not only the reason for his instruction regarding the collections, but his larger plan that regards or involves them along the way, along the line, that includes them as he continues to travel on to other churches that he is helping as well. As that plan in verses 5 through 9 is going to introduce a second set of instructions, where he's going to say with regard to Timothy in verses 9 and 11, be sure to treat him well because he is engaged in the work as Paul is, as he is then going to give them more context, understanding that it's not just orders and instructions. In verses 12, or just verse 12, he is going to also talk about Apollos. And in case they wanted to see Apollos but haven't seen him and they're wondering why, he's letting them know that Apollos is delayed and he will get there when he can. But right now, he has other things going on that have prevented him from wanting to go ahead and make the trip to Corinth, as he's then going to conclude with additional instructions in verses 12 through 18, helping them to understand, verses 13 through 18, where he is going to, in verse 13, give them some brief instructions as to how they should carry themselves or act in the meantime. And then in verses 15 through 18, he is going to remind them in much the same way he has reminded them to show compassion, concern, and actually give assistance to make Timothy's job a little bit easier. He's additionally going to talk about other co-workers in the work of the Lord that they should likewise respect and be sure to, as they can, assist. As he's then going to go on in verses 19 and 20 to send greetings from various members of the churches. In verse 19, the churches of Asia send you greetings. Then Aquila and Prisca, two famous names, together with the church in their house, are going to send greetings to them in the Lord. Likewise, in verse 20, he's going to say, all the brothers send you greetings, and correspondingly saying that they should greet one another with the relatively famous saying, with a holy kiss. As in verse 21, he is going to seem to make a sharp turn by saying in really verse 22, 21 through the end of the chapter, but specifically in verse 22, he's going to say, if anyone has no love for the Lord, let him be accursed. And that's not the only place Paul is going to offer a curse for certain groups of folks, but he's going to follow it up, like we said in verse 24, by saying, my love be with you all in Christ Jesus. Amen. Reminding me of a few things, not the least of which the curse caught my attention, as he is going to at least be fair about it, because by the time he gets to the Galatians, he's going to say, if anyone teaches another gospel, whether it's an angel or Paul himself, he's going to say, let them be accursed. And so he is not simply pointing a finger. He is talking about there are certain standards of behavior that matter regardless of who the person is. And that's going to be super important, because as he is encouraging them to look out for Timothy and others that he has named in these final greetings, he is going to not simply say, okay, these are my guys, and so I want you to look out for them. No, he's going to say that there are specific reasons why you look out for folks who are looking out for others. And we'll circle back to that. But in the meantime, one of the things that first caught my attention is the fact that he is having to tell them to look out for and be respectful of workers in the Lord in the first place. Reminded me that there are times when, if you look back to the letter to the Romans, he tells them to greet Phoebe because in the same way that he's talking about Timothy and his other co-workers here, because she's looked out for others, it's just fair to look out for her. But it doesn't seem, and I didn't really go back and take a close look to his closing words to the Romans, that he has to impress upon the Romans the need to be decent to those who have devoted themselves to working in the Lord. And so what it looks like at the end of this letter to the Corinthians, where he is over and over having to remind them of their priorities, it seems that the fact that their priorities have shifted is reflecting itself on the fact that it is no longer intuitive for them to naturally have an affection for those who have devoted themselves to the work of the Lord. And so he is having to remind them. And so low key, it's not such a good, what is it? It's not a good look. We can say it that way because it's almost like higher prices at the grocery store. If you're in the grocery stores on a regular basis in a time of inflation, like we have some prices that are up now, then I don't have to explain to you what it's like trying to stretch a dollar a little bit further if you're constantly in the grocery stores experiencing that. Likewise, if you are working, I don't have to tell you what it's like if you're working long hours to be exhausted, because that's kind of a natural derivative of doing a lot of work and feeling overwhelmed. But you have to explain it the less you can relate to those experiences. And so what is happening is in having to remind them not only to be kind and respectful of Timothy, but to likewise have to have that same thing towards Stephanas and others that he names in verses 15 through 18. It's almost like the Corinthians have lost touch with what it's like to be devoted on that level to the service of the Lord. And so the flip side is he is reminding them, as we said, that he still loves them, but his love comes in also giving subtle reminders and examples as to what that love looks like. And so for Paul's sake, even though he could simply be barking out orders, much like we saw in chapter 7, even when he is giving them commands about how to conduct themselves, understanding the difficult times that it seems like the church is going to be collectively facing, or at least going into in the days or maybe the years ahead, he tells them that the instructions that he's giving, first of all, are distinguished from the commands of the Lord. And even with his instructions, he's giving them a why, because he doesn't want them to be unnecessarily anxious going into days that are already going to be difficult enough. And so even though as an apostle, he could have simply told them the what without the why seems to be a subtle indication that when he tells them that he loves them, he's not simply making that up. He's giving them additional information to help them understand why he's giving them these instructions. And likewise, as we mentioned before, when he is telling them to look out for folks like Timothy, it's not simply this, as we said before, because I like Timothy. He's saying, no, Timothy is doing the work of the Lord as I am. And so he can empathize with Timothy's sacrifice. And once again, just like we saw with his words to the Romans, when you're looking at a Phoebe, you're looking at a person who is an investment in a lot of ways, because any assistance you give to Phoebe, when she is well cared for, she's going to care for other people. And so likewise, he seems to be implying that Timothy is one of those folks. And then likewise, when you get to, as we mentioned, verses 15 through 18, it's not just Timothy. When he talks about the household of Stephanas, he's going to say that they were the first converts, but not just to give them a look as those who have seniority. Beyond their seniority, he says they devoted themselves to the service of the saints in verse 15. And likewise, when he's telling them to look out for Stephanas, Fortunatus, and Achaeus, he's saying that their value to him is they have made up for the service of those who don't seem to be around to help Paul anymore. And so when he's saying, show them, recognition to those who are sacrificing, it's because they have a value beyond Paul simply being affectionate toward them. And he's recognizing the service and the kindness that they've shown to others. So likewise, it's only right that, God willing, the Corinthians respect them in that same way. And so when Paul closes out his letter to the Corinthians saying, my love be with you in the Lord, It's the subtleties that seem to give that statement value. Understanding that, as we mentioned before, he's given a long discussion or description in chapter 13 of what love is and what it does. But his description of what love does may be subtly strengthened by the way that he demonstrates it in this final chapter of 1 Corinthians, where he not only gives them guidance or instructions as he closes out the letter, but he honestly lets them know where they fit within his plans in the days, weeks, and maybe months ahead, as he likewise helps them understand why it's important to look out for the needs of those who have devoted themselves to looking out for the needs of others, as he seems to have spent most of the letter to the church at Corinth, encouraging them to grow in their priority for having that same kind of focus as well. But as we sometimes say, my prayer for you is my prayer for me. May God help us not only to grow in our genuine love for his people, but to help us grow in the subtle and not so subtle ways that we can improve in going about showing it. God's best to you as you go forward with him, though.